I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we'd like to thank the Secretary General for his briefing. First of all, I wish to express our firm rejection of the fact that the presidency today the meeting today is taking place under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East. We wish to recall that Russia and China requested that it be held under the agenda item, threats to international peace and security. That request was also contained in the relevant letter of the Iranian colleagues. The aggression that Iran has been subjected to today threatens to lead to escalation in an already escalated region, and it could go far beyond its borders. Particularly given the fact that one of the two initiators of this military venture is far from being a state in the region. Attempts by the British presidency to artificially downplay the degree of danger of the current situation is simply unacceptable. The presidency also grossly scorned Russia and China's request to invite as a briefer to today's meeting the professor at Columbia University, Jeffrey Sachs. The British colleagues do everything they can to assert the importance of inviting representatives of civil society to Security Council meetings. That clearly does not apply to cases when world-recognized academics are going to present truth that is unacceptable to the Western governments. In recent hours, we have witnessed a further extremely dangerous ratcheting up of escalation in the Middle East. Early in the morning of the 28th of February, the United States and Israel began launching massive military strikes on the territory of Iran. It was declared that one of the aims of the attacks one of the targets were the senior political leadership of the country and also civilian nuclear facilities. In real time, we are getting reports from the Iranian authorities about casualties, including among the civilian population. More than 200 people have died in 24 provinces of the country. We were particularly aggrieved to learn of the strike on a girls' school in Minab, where it is reported that 85 children were killed. We sincerely express our sincere condolences to the family and loved ones of the victims, and we wish a swift recovery to the injured. Our country will do everything necessary to ensure the security and safety of Russian citizens that are on the territory of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Mr. President, Washington and West Jerusalem's actions are nothing other than yet another unprovoked act of armed aggression against a sovereign and independent UN member state in violation of the Charter of the organization and of the fundamental principles of international law. They are openly aimed at further interfering in the internal affairs of Iran and at destroying a state that has found disfavor with the West. The US and Israel's irresponsible step, reckless step, as we warned previously, has already led to a sharp escalation of the situation across the region. Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and Syria and Saudi Arabia have all been affected. And those countries that have repeatedly said to their American partners that they don't need this escalation in the Middle East. Moreover, the US and Israel military operation has been a betrayal of diplomacy. These countries once again are bringing to bear military force against Iran at the very height of negotiations, just as they did in June 2025. Just the day before yesterday, on the 26th of February in Geneva, there was the latest round of US-Iranian contacts with the facilitation of Oman. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, noted that an understanding and agreement had been reached to continue the dialogue. For our part, we underscore that the Russian side has repeatedly received signals that the Israelis have no interest in a military confrontation with Iran. And then, despite Tehran's willingness to engage in the diplomatic process, it once again is stabbed in the back. Moreover, the fact that Washington for such a long time and methodically was building up its military presence in the region only confirms the fact that aggression against Iran was planned in advance. The actions of the United States and Israel risk triggering a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. Of particular concern, once again, are the threats to nuclear safety and security and radiological safety and security. The statements today from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, to the effect that this operation was aimed at preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon are not justified. They are unfounded. Tehran has consistently stated that it does not have any such plans and that is fulfilling its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Moreover, Iran has repeatedly underscored its readiness to put at the basis of new agreements with the United States the preservation of its status as a state, as a non-nuclear weapons state, provided that there is observation and respect for the legitimate right of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a state party to the NPT to develop peaceful nuclear technologies. Against this backdrop, the attempts of Western countries to justify the US and Israeli aggression as though there were some alleged threats to international peace and security are unfounded. These are threats that were allegedly coming from the Iranian nuclear program. We, of course, recall that the only source of reliable information in this regard are the relevant reports of the IAEA Director General, and those reports never indicated that. And they never said that Iran may be engaging in the development of a nuclear weapon. The objects that strikes are being launched against are under the agency's safeguards, that is to say, a priori, they cannot be used for any such activities. Against this backdrop, we expect that the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, will provide unambiguous assessments and will condemn this latest undermining of the NPT's authority and undermining of the global regime for the non-proliferation by the USA and Israel. Nuclear energy objects, including the Bushehr nuclear power plant, cannot in any circumstances be the target of strikes by armed forces. That is unacceptable. Mr. President, we note that today's events were the latest phase of consistent escalatory steps around Iran by Western countries. That includes the US-Israeli strikes on the country's territory in June 2025 and the US's open interference and the open interference by US allies in the domestic political situation in Iran in January of this year. We also remember the failed attempts by the United Kingdom, France, and Germany to trigger the mechanism to restore the effect of Security Council anti-Iran resolutions, the so-called snapback mechanism. However, that did not happen. Russia and a number of other UN member states repeatedly and in detail explained the reasons why the United Kingdom, France, and Germany did not have the right to invoke that mechanism. However, that did not work, and the United States and Israel once again have brought military force to bear. There are obvious parallels with the events of 2003 when the US representatives waved a test tube around in this room to justify their invasion of Iraq by saying that there were weapons of mass destruction present there that no one actually found. In 2023, US Vice President J.D. Vance said that the Iraq campaign was unforced. As a result, innocent Iraqis and Americans died, and that Washington had to learn that lesson. However, as it turns out, that lesson has not yet been learned. In the statements of the European colleagues, and we'll hear that again today, instead of condemning aggression and the deaths of Iranian civilians, we once again will hear the statement of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, saying the Iranian regime must understand that it has no other option but to engage in good faith negotiations to end its nuclear and ballistic programs, as well as its regional destabilization activities, end quote. Similar assessments were voiced by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer. These absurd statements were then backed up by a joint statement of the leaders of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, condemning only Iran's strikes on the countries in the region. Colleagues, just think for a moment. This sort of reaction is coming at a time when Iran has been subject to armed attack, to military attack at the peak of an active negotiating process. The hypocrisy of our European colleagues knows no borders. These aren't even double standards. It's a parallel reality, the other side of the looking glass. In the English language, there's an ideal term to describe the situation: victim blaming. One gets the impression that London, Paris, and Berlin are living within illusions that they have created for themselves and are broadcasting to the world. However, attempts to mislead the international community are doomed to fail. Any common-sense person will fully well understand who is responsible, who bears responsibility for this latest uncontrolled escalation. Mr. President, we demand that the United States and Israel immediately cease their aggressive actions. An alternative to resolving the Iranian subject, including its nuclear component, the alternative to peaceful and diplomatic means simply does not exist, and it never has. We insist on the immediate resumption of political and diplomatic settlement efforts and the pursuit of solutions based on international law, mutual respect, and a balance of interests. Russia unchangingly stands ready to provide all necessary assistance for that work. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing and support his call for de-escalation and return to diplomatic negotiations. Today, the United States and Israel brazenly launched military strikes against targets inside Iran, causing a sudden escalation of regional tensions. China is deeply concerned about this development. China consistently advocates that all parties should abide by the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and opposes and condemns the use or threat of force in international relations. China stresses that the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Iran and other regional countries must be respected. China is deeply saddened by the large number of civilian casualties caused by the conflict. At all times, the red line for protecting civilians in armed conflict must not be crossed, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable. China calls on all parties to fulfill their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, effectively ensure the safety of civilians and avoid attacks on civilian facilities. The use of force is not the right way to settle international disputes. It only intensifies hatred and confrontation. The escalation and spillover of tensions in the Middle East serves no one's interests. Dialogue and negotiations are the only way to resolve differences. China calls on an immediate cessation of military actions to prevent further cycles of escalation. The military strikes occurred at a time when the US and Iran were engaged in diplomatic negotiations, which is shocking. The parties concerned should demonstrate political sincerity, resume dialogue and negotiations as soon as possible, and return to the right track of a political solution. China stands ready to work with the international community to advance peace efforts and help restore peace and stability in the Middle East at an early date. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China.
Mr. President, this morning the United States regime jointly and in coordination with the Israeli regime initiated an unprovoked and premeditated aggression against the Islamic Republic of Iran for the second time in the recent months, while deliberately attacking civilian populated areas in multiple large cities of Iran where millions of people reside. As a result of this brutal armed attack, hundreds of civilians have been killed and injured. The aggression and atrocious crime of the United States regime and the Israeli regime and the deliberate and persistent targeting of civilian infrastructure are going. In addition to the numerous civilian residential buildings, the aggressors have also targeted a school in the city of Minab, Hormozgan province, killing more than 100 children. The number of innocent civilians continues to rise. This is not only an act of aggression, it is a war crime and a crime against humanity. Yet today, once again, the representative of the United States, through a regrettable pattern, has attempted to distort facts and rely on misinformation to justify the blatant aggression of the United States and Israel against my country. The facts, however, are unequivocal. The justification advanced by the representative of the United States today are illegal and entirely devoid of legal foundation. The baseless allegation invoked to defend this unlawful use of force have no standing under international law. The invocation of preemptive attack claims of imminent threats or other substantiated political claims cannot legitimize aggression. Such claims are unfounded legally, morally, and politically, and they contradicted the clear principles of the Charter of the United Nations. I also categorically reject the assertion made by the representative of France, the United Kingdom, and certain other Western members regarding Iran's peaceful nuclear program. These claims lack a factual and legal basis. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of the Israeli regime have openly claimed responsibility for this act of aggression and have explicitly articulated regime change as their objective, an unmistakable admission of their intent to violate Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The President of the United States has falsely described this aggression as necessary to neutralize an imminent threat to the American people. This is nothing more than a deliberate attempt to mislead the international community and the U.S. public opinion and manufacture consent for unlawful war. Similarly, the representative of the United States has cynically sought to mislead this Council, yet history provides ample documentation that the foreign policy of the United States has repeatedly relied on unlawful force, covert intervention, and political manipulation to alter the governments of other member states. This record is well established. The reality is clear and undeniable. What is taking place today against my country by the United States and the terrorist regime of Israel is a blatant act of aggression, a full-fledged violation of international law. No justification, no accusation, no narrative of disinformation can legitimize or excuse this manifest crime and aggression. Mr. President, we have communicated on several occasions with this Council and the Secretary General about warmongering statements and interfering actions in the internal affairs of Iran by the President of the U.S. in a blatant violation of the UN Charter and international law, and called for the Council action. Regrettably, all were unanswered. The issue before the Council is straightforward: whether any member state may, including a permanent member of this Council, through the use of force, coercion, or aggression, determine the political future of another state or impose control over its affairs. International law and the Charter are explicit on this matter.